They pressed record because there was something they could no longer keep trapped inside their heart. They thought this final message would be easy, but the moment they started talking about you, their voice began to break. There were words they had rehearsed 100 times, apologies they had carried for far too long, and one truth they were finally ready to admit. But when they reached the final sentence, emotion took over, and the recording ended before they could finish what they desperately wanted you to hear. And the unfinished words may reveal more about their feelings for you than the entire message before them. Listen carefully, because this was not an ordinary voice note recorded in a careless moment. Your soulmate had been thinking about making this recording for longer than anyone around them realized. They had spent nights staring at their phone, opening your name, closing it again, typing messages, and deleting them before you could ever see a single word. Something inside them kept saying they needed to speak, but fear kept stopping them. Fear that you had already moved on. Fear that you would hear their voice and remember every painful moment. Fear that the damage between you had become too deep to repair. Yet there was another fear that had suddenly become even stronger, the possibility that they might never get another chance to tell you what was truly in their heart. That is why they finally pressed record. No audience, no carefully written speech, no one coaching them on what to say, just their voice, their memories, and the feelings they had been hiding from everyone. At first, they tried to sound calm. They told themselves they would keep the message short. They would say what needed to be said, and then let you decide what happened next. But almost immediately, their emotions started betraying them. There were long pauses between certain words. You could hear them trying to breathe normally. At one point, they even stopped speaking completely, as though one particular memory of you had suddenly appeared in front of them. And when they finally continued, their voice was different, softer, more vulnerable. They admitted that there were moments when they acted as though losing you did not hurt them. They admitted that they allowed other people to believe they were fine. They smiled when they wanted to disappear. They stayed silent when they wanted to call you. They pretended they had accepted the distance while secretly wondering whether you still thought about them too. Then came the confession they had avoided for far too long. They said walking away from you did not give them the peace they expected. Instead, it created a silence in their life that nothing else seemed able to fill. New conversations felt empty. Busy days still ended with thoughts of you. Even when they tried to convince themselves that what happened between you was finished, some small reminder would pull them straight back into the past. A song. A familiar place, a sentence someone said, a certain time of night, and suddenly all the feelings they had buried would return at once. They began to understand that leaving someone is not always the same as letting them go. Sometimes the body moves forward while the heart remains exactly where it was. The recording continued, and your soulmate became more emotional with every sentence. They admitted there were things they should have defended. There were questions they should have asked instead of believing assumptions. There were moments when they should have chosen honesty instead of silence. And most painfully, they admitted that there was one moment, one specific moment, when they could have changed everything between you, but they let fear decide for them. They said they replay that moment more often than they want anyone to know. In their mind, they imagined choosing differently. They imagined stopping you before you walked away. They imagined saying the words they swallowed. They imagined what your life together might look like now if they had only been brave enough for a few more seconds. Don't skip, because the message became even more personal after that. Your soulmate suddenly said your name differently, almost as though speaking it out loud had unlocked something they had been fighting against. Their voice cracked. They apologized, but not in the casual way people apologize just to feel better about themselves. This sounded like someone finally understanding the full weight of what they had lost. They said they were sorry for every time their silence made you question your importance. Sorry for every moment you had to guess what they were feeling. Sorry for allowing pride, confusion, outside opinions, and fear to stand where love should have been. And then there was another pause, a long one. Long enough that it almost sounded like the recording had ended, but it had not. When they spoke again, their words were barely above a whisper. They said there was something they had never told anyone about the final days before everything changed between you. Something had happened behind the scenes. A conversation had taken place, and what they heard during that conversation influenced the decision they made about you. For a long time, they believed staying silent was protecting everyone involved. Now they realized that silence may have destroyed the one connection they were actually trying to protect. They said there was a truth you deserved to know from the beginning, and carrying it alone had become unbearable. Their breathing became uneven as they moved toward the end of the recording. They said they did not expect you to forgive them immediately. They did not expect you to erase the past. They were not even certain you would listen until the end. They only wanted you to know that whatever you believed about their feelings, there was one part of the story you never saw. One part that could explain why they suddenly became distant, why they stopped fighting when you expected them to fight, and why they made a decision that looked completely different from what their heart actually wanted. Then they started the final sentence. If I could have one chance to stand in front of you again, I would finally tell you that the real reason I never stopped. Their voice broke. There was silence. You could hear them trying to continue, but no words came out. And then the recording suddenly ended. But what makes this even more emotional is that the message may not have ended because they chose to stop recording. Because moments later, something happened, and another person discovered exactly what your soulmate had been trying to say in that unfinished final sentence. The recording ended, but the emotion inside that unfinished sentence did not disappear with the silence. In fact, what happened immediately afterward made the entire message feel even heavier. Someone close to your soulmate noticed how shaken they were. They had never seen them struggle like that over a voice recording before. Usually, your soulmate was the one who kept emotions hidden, the one who changed the subject when conversations became too personal, the one who insisted everything was fine even when it clearly was not. But this time there was no hiding it. Their hands were trembling. Their eyes were red. They kept staring at the phone as if they were trying to decide whether to delete the recording forever or send it before fear changed their mind again. The person standing nearby asked one simple question. Was that message for them? Your soulmate did not answer immediately. They looked away, wiped their face, and tried to regain control. But eventually they nodded. And then something unexpected happened. Instead of being embarrassed, instead of denying what they had just revealed, your soulmate finally admitted that you were still the one person connected to the deepest regret of their life. They said they had spent so much time pretending the past could stay buried that they had forgotten what it felt like to tell the truth. They had convinced themselves that silence was maturity, that staying away was respect, that not contacting you was somehow the right thing to do. But underneath all of those explanations was a truth they had been avoiding. Part of them was terrified that if they reached out and discovered you no longer cared, they would finally have to accept that losing you was permanent. The person beside them asked why they had stopped before finishing the final sentence. That question hit harder than expected. Your soulmate lowered their head and said they knew exactly how the sentence was supposed to end. They had known those words long before pressing record. They had repeated them silently countless times, yet saying them out loud made everything suddenly real. Once spoken, they could no longer hide behind uncertainty. They could no longer tell themselves maybe they had moved on, maybe the connection had faded, maybe what they felt was only nostalgia. Finishing that sentence meant admitting something that would change the meaning of everything they had done since the separation. Then your soulmate revealed something even more painful. They said they had almost contacted you several times before this recording. There had been one night when your number was already on the screen. Their finger hovered over the call button for nearly a minute. They wanted to hear your voice so badly that they could barely breathe. But just before calling, they remembered the last expression they saw on your face. They remembered the hurt. They remembered how exhausted you seemed from trying to understand them. And they convinced themselves that contacting you might reopen wounds you had finally started healing. So they locked the phone, sat alone in silence, and cried over a conversation that never happened. What they did not know was that this unfinished voice message would force them to face everything again. The person who had witnessed the recording told your soulmate something they were not prepared to hear. They said, "You keep telling yourself you are protecting them by staying silent, but what if your silence is the reason they never knew the truth?" Your soulmate froze. That sentence seemed to cut through every excuse they had built over the years, because deep down, they knew there were things you had never been told. You knew the outcome, but not everything that caused it. You knew they stepped away, but you did not know every conversation that happened before they made that choice. You saw the distance, but you never saw the pressure, the confusion, the warnings, and the private fears that were influencing them while they were pulling away from you. Your soulmate finally admitted that one conversation from the past had changed everything. Someone had approached them during a vulnerable moment and told them something about you. It was presented as a warning. They were told that continuing the relationship would eventually hurt you. They were told that you had already begun questioning the connection. They were told that you wanted a different future, but were afraid to say it directly. And because your soulmate was already emotionally overwhelmed, they believed more of that conversation than they should have. Instead of coming directly to you and asking whether any of it was true, they withdrew. They waited for you to prove the warning wrong without ever telling you there was a warning in the first place. That is where the misunderstanding grew. You may have seen their silence as rejection. They may have seen your confusion as confirmation. You may have waited for them to fight for you. They may have been waiting for a sign that you still wanted them. Two people with feelings still alive between them were standing on opposite sides of a misunderstanding, each believing the other had already made a decision. And now, after all this time, your soulmate realized something devastating. The person who gave them that warning may not have been telling the truth. The moment that possibility entered their mind, everything changed. Your soulmate started asking questions they should have asked long ago. Why had that person been so interested in separating the two of you? Why had they insisted certain things were true without providing proof? Why had they discouraged your soulmate from talking directly to you? Why did they always seem to appear exactly when your connection was becoming stronger? And most importantly, why had they disappeared from the situation after your soulmate finally walked away? Suddenly, the past looked different. Your soulmate went back through old messages, old dates, old conversations, and memories they had tried not to revisit. They began noticing inconsistencies. Certain things they had been told about you did not match the way you had actually behaved. Certain accusations never had evidence behind them. Certain warnings had been built entirely on assumptions. The deeper they looked, the more they started wondering whether their biggest decision had been influenced by someone who had their own reason for keeping the two of you apart. That discovery was one reason the final message became so emotional. Your soulmate was not only grieving the relationship anymore, they were grieving the possibility that they had lost years because they trusted the wrong voice. They were realizing that some of the pain between you may have been avoidable. They were remembering all the moments when you tried to understand what was wrong, while they gave you incomplete answers because they were afraid of exposing the conversation happening behind your back. And then they remembered something you once said. It was a sentence they had dismissed at the time, something about feeling as though someone was trying to create distance between you. Your soulmate had told you that you were overthinking. They had defended the very situation that might have been destroying your connection. Now those old words returned with painful clarity. They whispered they knew something was wrong before I did. That realization broke them again. They picked up the phone and replayed the unfinished recording from the beginning. This time, instead of stopping when the emotion became difficult, they listened to every pause, every broken breath, every confession. When they reached the unfinished sentence, "If I could have one chance to stand in front of you again, I would finally tell you that the real reason I never stopped," they closed their eyes. And this time they completed the sentence out loud. But the person beside them heard exactly what they said. And after hearing those final words, that person immediately told your soulmate there was something else they needed to know about you, something that had been kept from them for a very long time. The person beside your soulmate hesitated before saying anything more, because what they were about to reveal had the power to reopen a part of the past that everyone had tried to bury. Your soulmate immediately noticed the change in their expression. A few seconds earlier, they had been encouraging honesty. Now they looked almost nervous, as if they had accidentally stepped into a truth they were never supposed to touch. Your soulmate asked what they meant when they said something had been kept from them about you. At first, there was no answer, just a long silence. Then came a sentence that made your soulmate's entire face change. There was a time when they tried to reach you, and somebody made sure you never knew. For a moment, your soulmate thought they had misunderstood. They asked the question again, more slowly this time. "What do you mean they tried to reach me?" The person explained that after everything fell apart between the two of you, there had been at least one attempt from your side to clear up the confusion. Not some dramatic public confrontation, not an angry demand. It was something much quieter and more sincere. You had apparently tried to get a message to them because there were things you still wanted to say, things you believed they deserved to hear directly from you. But according to this person, that message never reached your soulmate. The room suddenly felt smaller. Your soulmate started thinking back to that period, trying desperately to remember every detail. They remembered waiting. They remembered secretly hoping you would contact them. They remembered checking their phone far more often than they would ever admit. They remembered telling themselves that if you truly wanted them in your life, surely you would find some way to say it. And when nothing came, they used your silence as proof that the warnings had been correct. They convinced themselves you had accepted the ending. They convinced themselves they were the only one still holding on. Now they were hearing that your silence may never have been silence at all. That realization hit them harder than anything in the voice recording. They stood up and began pacing, asking question after question. Who stopped the message? What exactly did you say? How long ago did this happen? Why had nobody told them? The person beside them tried to calm the situation, but your soulmate no longer wanted calm explanations. They wanted facts. For years, they had lived with one version of the story, and now that version was collapsing piece by piece. Finally, the person admitted that someone close to the situation had believed keeping you apart was for the best. They had seen the emotional confusion between both of you and decided they knew what outcome would protect everyone. They did not necessarily think of themselves as cruel. In their mind, they were preventing more pain. But instead of allowing you and your soulmate to make your own decision, they interfered. They controlled information. They decided which words were delivered and which were never heard. And that interference may have changed the entire direction of your relationship. Your soulmate became completely still. They thought about every time they blamed you for not fighting harder. Every time they told themselves you had chosen pride over love. Every time they looked back and wondered why you had never corrected the misunderstanding. What if you had tried? What if you had been standing on the other side of the same silence, believing they had rejected your attempt to make things right? That possibility was almost unbearable. Then came another detail. The message you had tried to send was not simply an apology. It reportedly contained something much more important. You had wanted your soulmate to know that some of the things being said about you were not true. You wanted to explain that you had never asked for the separation others claimed you wanted. You had never secretly decided they were not enough. You had never been planning some completely different future behind their back. In fact, you had apparently been confused by the sudden change in their behavior and were searching for an explanation yourself. Your soulmate sat down again, staring at nothing. Suddenly, the entire past began rearranging itself inside their mind. What they had interpreted as your emotional distance may have been confusion. What they had interpreted as your lack of effort may have been an effort that was intercepted. What they had interpreted as proof that you wanted to leave may have been nothing more than the story someone else had planted in their head. And that unfinished sentence from the voice recording suddenly became even more important. The person beside them asked quietly, "What were you trying to say at the end?" Your soulmate resisted at first. They said it did not matter anymore. They said too much time had passed. They said finishing the sentence could not undo what happened, but those words sounded weak even to them, because the truth was obvious. If it truly did not matter, they would never have made the recording. After another long silence, they finally repeated the beginning. If I could have one chance to stand in front of you again, I would finally tell you that the real reason I never stopped. Their voice shook again. Then, barely above a whisper, they finished it. Loving you was because some part of me always believed our story ended before we ever got the truth. The words sat in the room like something sacred and painful. Your soulmate covered their face. They had finally said it. The sentence they could not finish while recording was now real. They had never completely stopped loving you. They had tried to turn those feelings into memories. They had tried to call them regret, nostalgia, unfinished business, anything except love. But underneath every explanation was the same truth. Something in them had never accepted the way your story ended. And now they had a reason to question whether that ending had ever truly belonged to either of you. But there was still one problem. The voice message had not been sent. Your soulmate looked down at the recording and saw it sitting there, unfinished, carrying every confession they had been too afraid to speak directly to you. Their finger hovered over the screen. Delete it and everything could return to silence. Send it and there would be no controlling what happened next. They asked the person beside them, "What if they don't want to hear from me anymore?" The answer came immediately. What if they've been waiting all this time to hear the truth? That sentence changed something. Your soulmate opened the recording again, but instead of sending it immediately, they decided to make one final addition. They pressed record once more, intending to finish the message properly this time. No vague words, no hiding, no letting fear choose the ending again. They began by saying your name. Then they told you there was something they had recently learned about the past. They admitted they might have believed things about you that were never true. They admitted that someone may have interfered with a message you once tried to send. They admitted that their silence was not proof they stopped caring. And then they said something they had never said before. If there is even the smallest part of you that still wonders whether what we had was real, please know I have wondered the same thing every single day. Your soulmate stopped for a moment, gathered themselves, and prepared to finish the recording. But before they could press send, their phone lit up. A new message had arrived. And when they saw the name on the screen, every bit of color disappeared from their face, because it was from the exact person connected to the secret that had kept the two of you apart. The name glowing on the screen belonged to the one person your soulmate had started questioning more than anyone else. For years, this person had presented themselves as helpful, protective, almost concerned about both of you. They had always known what to say when your soulmate was confused. They had always appeared at the exact moment your connection became complicated. And somehow, whenever your soulmate considered reaching back toward you, this person had another warning, another reason to stay away, another story that made distance seem like the safest choice. But now, after everything your soulmate had just learned, that familiar name no longer felt comforting. It felt like the missing piece of a story that had been manipulated for far too long. The message itself was short. Before you contact them, you need to hear my side. Your soulmate stared at those words without moving. Nobody had told this person about the unfinished voice recording. Nobody had told them your soulmate was thinking about contacting you. At least, that was what your soulmate believed. So how did they know? How did they know something was changing tonight? That question immediately created another layer of suspicion. Your soulmate looked toward the person sitting beside them and asked if they had spoken to anyone else. The answer was no. This conversation had stayed inside the room. That meant either the timing was an unbelievable coincidence, or someone had been paying much closer attention to your soulmate than they realized. For the first time, your soulmate did not respond immediately. In the past, they would have answered. They would have allowed this person to explain. They would have listened to another carefully prepared version of events and probably questioned their own instincts again. But tonight felt different. Too many things had already stopped making sense. Too many old memories were beginning to look completely different. And there was something inside your soulmate finally refusing to be guided by anyone else's version of what happened between the two of you. They placed the phone down. Then they said quietly, "Not this time." Those 3 words carried years of frustration. Not this time would somebody else decide what they should believe about you. Not this time would somebody else speak on your behalf. Not this time would fear replace a direct conversation. Not this time would another warning stop them from searching for the truth. Your soulmate picked the phone back up and opened the unfinished voice message again. Their finger moved toward the send button, but before they pressed it, another notification appeared from the same person. This message was longer. "I know what you were told tonight, and I know you probably think I kept you apart, but there are things you still don't understand. They weren't completely honest with you either." That sentence hit your soulmate differently. For a moment, old doubt returned. What if there was still more to the story? What if you had hidden something too? What if reaching out only opened another door to disappointment? The mind can become very powerful when it has been trained by years of fear. And your soulmate had spent a long time believing that every attempt to return to you would eventually lead to more pain. But then they remembered something important. Almost every painful decision in this story had been made without the two of you speaking honestly to each other. Someone said something about you. Someone said something about them. Someone interpreted your silence. Someone interpreted their distance. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about what the two of you felt, except the two people who actually needed to have the conversation. That realization became impossible to ignore. Your soulmate finally responded with one question. What exactly did you stop them from telling me? The reply did not come immediately. Minutes passed, then 10 minutes, then longer. And every second of silence made the answer feel more obvious. If there had been nothing to hide, why was such a simple question so difficult to answer? Your soulmate sent another message. No explanation, no excuses. Tell me exactly what happened. This time the typing indicator appeared, stopped, appeared again, stopped again. Your soulmate watched it like their entire past was sitting behind those three moving dots. Finally, a reply arrived. I never wanted things to go this far. Your soulmate's heart started pounding. That was not a denial. They asked again, what did you do? The answer that followed changed the emotional weight of everything. The person admitted that during the period when your relationship was falling apart, they had intercepted an attempt from you to reconnect. According to them, they genuinely believed they were preventing more emotional chaos. They knew your soulmate was already confused. They knew other people were pressuring them. They knew the two of you had reached a fragile point, and instead of allowing your message to reach them, they decided your soulmate needed space. But that was only the beginning. Because after stopping your message, they apparently told your soulmate something completely different. They said you had decided not to reach out. They said you wanted distance. They said you were ready to leave everything behind. And those words became one of the reasons your soulmate stopped waiting. Your soulmate read the confession twice, then a third time. Their eyes filled with tears, but this time those tears carried something beyond sadness. There was anger, shock, disbelief, and underneath all of it was the unbearable thought of how differently life might have unfolded if one message had been allowed to reach its destination. All those nights your soulmate thought you had forgotten them. All those mornings they woke up convincing themselves to move forward. All those moments they nearly called, but stopped because they believed you had already made your choice. What if the choice had never been yours? What if the silence they had blamed you for had been created by somebody else? Your soulmate immediately asked what the message had said. Again, hesitation. Then came the reply. I don't remember every word. Your soulmate knew that was not enough. What do you remember? Another pause. Then one line appeared. They said they didn't want to lose you over something that wasn't true. Your soulmate stopped breathing for a second. That sentence alone was enough to destroy years of assumptions. Because while your soulmate believed you had abandoned the connection, you may have been trying to save it. While they believed you no longer cared, you may have been fighting against a lie you could not even fully see. While they were waiting for proof that you wanted them, the proof may have already existed, and someone had deliberately kept it from them. Don't skip, because what happened next pushed your soulmate beyond sadness and into a decision they had avoided for years. They asked the person to send everything they still had from that time. Screenshots, old messages, dates, anything connected to your attempt to reach them. At first, the person resisted. They said digging through the past would only create more pain. They said everyone had moved forward. They said reopening everything would not change what had happened. But your soulmate answered with something they had never said before. You already decided for us once. You don't get to decide again. There was no response for several minutes. Then one image arrived. It was an old screenshot. The date alone made your soulmate's stomach turn. It had been sent shortly after the moment they thought you had given up completely. And there, visible inside the screenshot, were words from you. Not cold words, not angry words. Not words from somebody who had stopped caring. You had written that you did not understand why everything had changed so suddenly. You had written that if your soulmate wanted the connection to end, you would respect it, but you needed to hear that decision directly from them, not through other people. You had written that there were things being said about you that were simply not true, and then there was one final line. I'm still here if they want the truth. Your soulmate covered their mouth. For years they had believed you disappeared, but you had been there. You had been waiting for the exact same thing they were waiting for, a direct conversation, and neither of you ever knew. Something changed inside your soulmate at that moment. The fear of contacting you no longer felt bigger than the regret of remaining silent. They returned to the unfinished recording. They listened to the broken final sentence again. Then they listened to the second recording they had made after learning the first part of the truth. Neither felt complete anymore. There was too much to say, so your soulmate deleted neither of them. Instead, they opened a fresh recording. This time, their voice was steadier. I don't know what you believe about me anymore. I don't know whether hearing my voice will comfort you or upset you. But tonight I learned something I should have known years ago. You tried to reach me. I never knew. And I need you to understand that I spent all this time believing your silence meant you had stopped caring. They paused. I was wrong. Those 3 words seemed to release something that had been trapped inside them. They continued. I believed people I should have questioned. I made decisions without giving you the chance to speak for yourself. And if that made you feel unwanted, forgotten, or easily replaced, I am more sorry than I know how to explain. Their voice began breaking again, but this time they refused to stop. They told you they had never completely stopped thinking about what the 2 of you could have been. They told you that some part of them had always believed the ending felt wrong. They told you they had finally discovered why. And then they reached the words they had been unable to finish earlier. If I could stand in front of you right now, I would tell you that the real reason I never stopped loving you is because deep down, I never believed we were supposed to lose each other like this. Silence followed. But this time they did not end the recording. They took a breath and added one final sentence. If there is still anything you need to ask me, I will answer it honestly, even if the truth hurts. Then they pressed stop. The message was ready. Their finger hovered over send. One touch could break years of silence. One touch could finally put the truth in your hands. Your soulmate closed their eyes and sent it. The screen showed that the message had been delivered. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then suddenly, beneath the recording, one small notification appeared. The message had been opened. Your soulmate froze. Someone was listening. And before the voice recording had even finished playing, a reply began appearing on the screen. A reply that started with only 5 words. You still don't know everything. Your soulmate stared at those 5 words until the screen blurred through their tears. You still don't know everything was not the answer they had expected after finally sending the truth. For a moment, fear returned, because it felt as though another hidden piece of the past was about to surface. But this time, they refused to run from whatever came next. They had spent too many years allowing fear, assumptions, and other people's voices to control their choices. So they held the phone tightly and waited for the rest of your message. A second reply appeared a few moments later. You explained that there had been another reason you tried so hard to reach them all those years ago. You had discovered that someone was feeding both of you different versions of the same story. At first, you thought it was simply confusion. Then you began noticing how perfectly every misunderstanding seemed to push the 2 of you farther apart. Every time you tried to explain yourself, another rumor appeared. Every time your soulmate seemed ready to return, someone gave them another reason to doubt you. And eventually, you realized that the distance between you was being strengthened by information neither of you had verified directly. Your soulmate felt their chest tighten as they read each sentence. The truth was finally confirming what they had only started suspecting tonight. You had not simply disappeared from their life. You had been trying to understand the same mystery from the opposite side. You told them there were nights when you wanted to call, but feared they had already chosen to leave. There were messages you wrote, but never sent because you believed they wanted nothing more from you. There were moments you defended them, even when people around you insisted you should forget everything. And there was one truth you had never admitted to anyone. You never completely stopped hoping that one day they would come back and ask you directly what really happened. When your soulmate read that line, they could no longer hold back their tears, because that was exactly what they had secretly wanted from you too. 2 people had spent years waiting for the same conversation. 2 people had carried the same unanswered questions. 2 people had mistaken silence for rejection when the truth was far more complicated. Your soulmate immediately started typing, then stopped. Nothing they wrote seemed powerful enough for what they were feeling. So instead of sending another text, they recorded one more voice message. This time there was no carefully planned opening and no attempt to hide the emotion. They simply told you they were sorry. They apologized for believing other people before asking you for the truth. They apologized for every moment their silence made you feel disposable. They apologized for making you carry questions that should have been answered years ago. Then they admitted something even deeper. They said they had tried to rebuild their life without you. They had smiled, made plans, kept moving, and convinced everyone around them that the chapter was closed. But privately, every future they imagined still carried some trace of you. Sometimes it was your voice. Sometimes it was the way you once understood them, without needing long explanations. Sometimes it was simply the feeling that one important person was missing from every room. They said they had spent years calling that feeling regret because calling it love felt too dangerous. But tonight, they were finally done hiding behind safer words. I loved you then, and some part of me never stopped loving you, they confessed. There was no dramatic promise attached to those words. They did not ask you to forget the past. They did not demand another chance. They did not pretend one emotional message could repair years of distance. They only asked for something the two of you should have had from the beginning. One honest conversation without anyone standing between you. When you heard the message, you did not answer immediately. Those minutes felt endless to your soulmate. But finally, a new message appeared on the screen. I don't know what happens after this, but I want that conversation too. Your soulmate closed their eyes as relief washed over them. For the first time in years, the future did not feel completely locked by the past. Neither of you knew whether the conversation would end in reconciliation, forgiveness, friendship, or simply closure. But for once, the decision would belong to the two people whose lives were actually affected by it. No hidden messenger would speak for you. No third person would decide what either of you meant. No rumor would be allowed to replace a direct question. And no unfinished sentence would carry the weight of everything left unsaid. Your soulmate listened once more to that original recording they had almost deleted. They reached the place where their voice had broken before finishing the final sentence. This time, instead of feeling ashamed, they smiled through their tears, because the sentence no longer needed to remain unfinished. They finally knew exactly what they wanted you to hear. Our story may have been interrupted by fear and misunderstanding, but the truth finally brought our voices back to each other.